Welcome to the Bible Study Channel. Today we examine the Revised Common Lectionary Readings for Proper 15, Year 8, August 16, 2026. One family is repaired after betrayal. Foreigners are welcomed to God's holy mountain. Paul insists that God has not rejected Israel. A Canaanite mother refuses to accept that mercy has no place for her child. Together, these readings ask how grace can cross a boundary while God's covenant promises remain firm. The answer unfolds through a mercy with history and moral shape. Joseph's brothers come near after their wrong is named and changed responsibility appears. Isaiah's open house is grounded in justice, Sabbath, and covenant loyalty. Romans roots Gentile hope in God's irrevocable calling of Israel. Matthew brings a foreign woman to the edge of Israel's table, where her persistent plea receives an answer. The lectionary's conversation concerns belonging, but it begins with God's faithfulness. God gathers people without discarding the promises that made the gathering possible. The first Old Testament track reaches the emotional center of Joseph's story. In Genesis 45, Joseph reveals himself to the brothers who sold him, provides for the family during famine, and restores conversation after years of grief. Psalm 133 celebrates kindred dwelling together under blessing that descends like Aaron's oil and Hermon's dew. The alternate track begins with Isaiah 56. God's approaching salvation calls for justice, righteousness, and a house of prayer for all peoples. Psalm 67 turns Israel's priestly blessing outward so God's saving way may be known among every nation. Romans 11 then asks whether God has rejected Israel. Paul answers, by no means, and declares God's gifts and calling irrevocable. Matthew 15 moves from a dispute about defilement to the region of Tyre and Sidon, where a Canaanite woman's cry tests every easy account of covenant boundaries. Each passage keeps its own voice. Read together, they show mercy gathering people through promises God refuses to abandon. Joseph does not erase the crime. He says, I am your brother, Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. The words land after Judah, in the previous chapter, has offered himself in Benjamin's place. The family has changed, and Joseph has seen evidence of it. He then interprets his own life. God sent him ahead to preserve life through the famine. Genesis later holds both intentions in one sentence. The brothers intended harm, God intended good. Providence overrules evil without turning evil into goodness or removing human guilt. Notice who gives that interpretation. Joseph, the harmed brother, speaks about his own suffering. Bystanders receive no permission to tell wounded people that cruelty happened for a reason. Reconciliation here has substance. Wrong is named, responsibility has changed, food and land are promised, tears are shed, and only after the kisses do the brothers talk with Joseph. Psalm 133 names the good of that restored communion. Its blessing descends from God. Unity is a gift received through truthful, life-giving repair. Isaiah begins with a command, maintain justice and do what is right, because God's salvation is near. The full unit also hears two people who fear exclusion. The foreigner worries that the Lord will separate him from the people. The eunuch calls himself a dry tree. God promises a lasting name inside his house, then welcomes foreigners who love the Lord, keep Sabbath, and hold fast the covenant. My house shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples. The gatherer of Israel's outcasts will gather still others. This hospitality has a covenant shape. Justice, resistance to evil, worship, and welcome belong together. Psalm 67 supplies the missionary horizon. It adapts the priestly blessing from Numbers 6, may God's face shine upon us, so that God's way becomes known on earth. Israel remains the us, and the Lord remains our God. Particular election carries blessing outward. The nations rejoice because God judges with equity and guides them. Covenant holiness becomes public good rather than private possession. Paul asks the question Christian theology must never evade, has God rejected his people? His answer is emphatic, by no means. Paul names himself as an Israelite, a descendant of Abraham from Benjamin's tribe. Later in the chapter he tells Gentile believers that they are wild olive branches grafted into Israel's nourishing root. They receive a warning against arrogance. The branch does not support the root supports the branch. That omitted context controls the lection's closing line: the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. Paul's word for irrevocable carries the sense of something God does not regret or revoke. Any Christian theology that treats the church as Israel's cancellation runs against Paul's stated claim. Gentiles receive mercy through Israel's Messiah and Israel's scriptures. They join a story they did not create. God's faithfulness to Israel is therefore part of the gospel itself, because a God who abandons prior promises could offer no secure promise to anyone else. Paul describes a surprising exchange. Gentiles who were disobedient have received mercy, and Israel's present disobedience does not exhaust God's purpose for Israel. God has consigned all to disobedience, that he may have mercy on all. Jew and Gentile now stand inside one argument about grace. Disobedience is universal, mercy belongs to God. This destroys every attempt to rank peoples by spiritual worth. The word all has also carried a long debate. Some Christians hear a promise that every individual will finally be saved. Others understand Paul to mean both groups, Jews and Gentiles, without making a claim about each person's final destiny. The verse gives mercy universal scope, though this short lection does not settle the whole debate over universal salvation. Paul himself ends the chapter in wonder before God's unsearchable wisdom. His argument has already accomplished something decisive: Gentile pride is excluded, Israel's calling remains, and salvation rests in mercy rather than ethnic status or moral superiority. Matthew places the Canaanite woman after a dispute over ritual handwashing. Jesus tells the crowd that defilement comes from what proceeds out of the heart: evil intentions, murder, adultery, theft, false witness, and slander. He closes by saying that eating with unwashed hands does not defile. Matthew's wording matters. Unlike Mark's parallel account, Matthew does not add an editorial sentence declaring all foods clean. The immediate dispute concerns a human tradition about washing, while Jesus presses holiness into the moral center of a person. Then the story changes geography. Jesus withdraws toward Tyre and Sidon, and Matthew calls the woman who approaches him a Canaanite. That old biblical name evokes historic enmity more sharply than Mark's description: Syrophoenician. The sequence forces a test. If pollution rises from a murderous or slanderous heart, inherited labels cannot by themselves identify who is clean, faithful, or worthy to be heard. The next voice belongs to the supposed outsider. She cries, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David, my daughter is tormented." Jesus first gives no answer. The disciples want her sent away. Jesus names his mission to the lost sheep of Israel, and when she kneels before him, he says that the children's bread should not be thrown to the dogs. The Greek word can mean small household dogs, yet a diminutive does not remove the unequal place assigned by the saying. Interpreters divide over this exchange. Some see Jesus testing and revealing her faith. Some think he voices Israel's priorities so the disciples can watch the boundary open. Others believe the woman's answer presses the mission toward its Gentile horizon. Matthew does not disclose Jesus' unspoken motive, so we should resist inventing one that makes the scene easy. Her answer gives us firmer ground. She grants the children their place and rejects any scarcity of mercy. Even the dogs eat the crumbs falling from their master's table. Jesus calls her faith great, grants her desire, and her daughter is healed. The outsider understands the abundance at Israel's table. Covenant mercy runs from Joseph's tears to the woman's answered prayer. Genesis shows providence preserving a family through human betrayal while leaving the betrayal honestly named. Psalm 133 receives reconciled communion as blessing from above. Isaiah sees the holy community widened by foreigners whose worship and obedience display God's gathering work. Psalm 67 says Israel is blessed so God's saving way reaches the nations. Romans guards the center: Israel has not been rejected, and Gentile believers live from Israel's root. Matthew then places a Canaanite mother before Israel's Messiah. She receives mercy from the abundance she already perceives in him. God's particular promises create a history through which wider mercy comes. Grace does not need broken promises to become generous. Holiness serves this gathering through justice, truthful speech, worship, and transformed hearts. Human disobedience leaves every people dependent upon mercy. The table grows because the host is faithful, and the crumbs prove that his provision exceeds the boundaries his disciples are prepared to defend. Joseph teaches restraint beside another person's wound. Offers safety, truth, food, and time before explanations. Never turn his providential reading of his own life into pressure on someone else to forgive quickly or resume unsafe contact. Romans demands repentance from Christian contempt for Jews. Gentile believers live from a root they did not plant, so preaching and worship should honor God's continuing faithfulness to Israel. Matthew places the church beside disciples who regard a desperate mother's cry as disruption. Every congregation should ask whose voice it is trying to quiet, especially when that voice comes from outside familiar boundaries. The woman's persistence must never become an excuse to humiliate people before helping them. It exposes the poverty of communities that guard bread while a child suffers. Psalm 133 and Isaiah 56 make unity concrete, changed responsibility, justice, shared worship, practical provision, and durable belonging. In such a community, mercy is more than a welcome sign. People can see it, eat from it, and live. Thank you for studying with us today. If this helped you understand the scriptures, please like and subscribe. We will see you next time.